Hey there, welcome to Night Lectures, your daily dose of fascinating stories. What do Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, Michelangelo, and Machiavelli have in common? They all lived and created during an age when a single family ruled not only Florence, but history itself. In this video, you will discover the full, dramatic, and brilliant story of the Medici, the dynasty of bankers, patrons, schemers, and dreamers who transformed Italy and Europe. We will tell how a simple cloth merchant built a financial empire, how Cosimo the Elder turned money into influence, how Lorenzo the Magnificent became the symbol of an era, and how two members of the family ascended the papal throne. You will see how palaces were born, how power intertwined with art, how love of beauty became a political instrument, and how it all ended. Share your ideas for future videos in the comments and hit the subscribe button. New bedtime stories come out here daily. In the early 14th century, when echoes of the feudal age still hung over Europe and cities obeyed monarchs, nobles, and the church, a different order was emerging on the banks of the Arno, a world where money, contracts, and ideas played the decisive role. Florence was not the largest or richest Italian city, but it possessed something unique: self-governance, vigorous trade, a powerful banking system, and a thirst for intellectual renewal. The Florentines were people of action. At dawn, when the bells rang, the streets filled with apprentices, merchants, couriers, and guild advisors. In the square before Santa Maria Novella, barrels of olive oil, bales of Florentine wool, sacks of Eastern spices, and fine Lucchese cloth changed hands. But they discussed not only prices, also the elections to the Council of 100, lawsuits, marriage alliances, and rumors about bankers from Genoa or Venice. Florence was a republic governed by elected magistrates, the Signoria. Yet behind this democratic facade raged a hidden struggle among powerful families, merchant guilds, and old noble houses. With no king, duke, or central authority, everything depended on mutual interest and fragile balance. Whoever controlled commerce and credit controlled the laws. By the mid-14th century, Florentine bankers had become some of the most influential people in Europe. Their bills of exchange were accepted in Bruges, Paris, London, Aragon, and along the Adriatic coast. Florence pioneered transnational accounting, credit mechanisms, and double-entry bookkeeping. Its golden florin, first minted in 1249, became the standard European currency. The great banking houses, Bardi, Peruzzi, and later Acciaiuoli, financed not only trade, but also kings. In 1343, when King Edward III of England defaulted on his debts, both houses collapsed, taking thousands of deposits with them. It was more than a financial disaster. It was a political revelation. Money was not merely a tool of wealth, but of power and ruin. After the crisis came social unrest. A struggle flared between the old aristocracy and the new merchant craft elite. In 1378, the Ciompi Revolt broke out, an uprising of poor weavers and laborers. For a short time, they seized power and demanded representation. Though soon suppressed, the revolt revealed the city's restless, boiling spirit, where prosperity coexisted with inequality and liberty with class tension. Florence's social fabric rested on arti, guilds divided into greater, judges, merchants, bankers, and lesser, craftsmen, tanners, butchers. Only members of the greater guilds could hold high office. Through these institutions, the Medici and other families rose toward power. At the end of the century, a new ideology was taking shape: humanism. Still embryonic, it echoed in the writings of Petrarch and Boccaccio. Wealthy citizens began collecting Latin manuscripts, commissioning copies of Aristotle, Cicero, and Plato. The educated man was no longer only a cleric or jurist. He became a thinker, collector, and patron. Architecture too expressed this awakening. In 1360, construction began on the vast dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, a project left unfinished for decades, until Filippo Brunelleschi conceived a daring engineering solution. That the citizens were willing to wait almost 50 years for an architectural miracle speaks of a new age, one where the pursuit of perfection outweighed profit. Yet no artist or thinker could thrive without patrons. Here entered those who did not create art themselves, but created the conditions for it to exist. Among them was Giovanni de Bicci de Medici, a man of mercantile origin, not noble birth, but endowed with patience, prudence, and vision. Shunning public fame and intrigue, he quietly built not only a bank, but a model of future power. He understood before others that a lasting financial house must be tied to the city's governance, that banking was not merely business, but influence, and that those who served the city through charity, building, and stability could expect loyalty in return. When people think of the Medici, they recall Lorenzo the Magnificent or Cosimo the Elder. Yet the roots of their greatness lie in the unassuming figure of Giovanni de' Bicci de' Medici. He neither sought glory nor led armies, yet he transformed the Medici name from a merchant surname into a symbol of political and financial might across Italy. Giovanni was born around 1360, probably in summer. His father Averardo de' Bicci was no nobleman but a modest wool merchant with limited guild ties and no political ambitions. The family lived near the old city gates in a plain house but held firm values of labor, honesty, and dignity. As a boy, Giovanni showed a gift for precision, silence, and calculation. In an age that valued speeches and alliances, he chose diligence and discretion. In the early 1380s, he moved to Rome, not for power, but to learn banking. He entered the firm of Vieri di Cambio, one of the largest financial houses of the time. In the Eternal City, he realized that true strength lay not in titles but in trust. When Vieri's bank collapsed in the late 1390s, Giovanni did not despair. He retained clients, connections, and reputation. By the early 15th century, he founded his own bank, quietly, without heraldry or vanity. His creed: be silent, count carefully, wait. The key to success was partnership with the Roman Curia. The church, a vast administrative machine, required reliable financiers to handle tithes, transfers, and debts. Giovanni's efficiency earned him favor. By 1402, his bank had become the unofficial financial arm of the papal court, bringing gold, trust, and protection. Back in Florence, he avoided public office and family feuds among the Albizzi or Strozzi. Instead, he built networks of gratitude, paying debts for some, placing others' sons in guilds, rebuilding workshops after fires. In return, he asked only remembrance, who had helped them. He sponsored the restoration of San Lorenzo, Florence's oldest basilica, funding altars and ornaments, but refused inscriptions or credit. His modesty, deliberate and strategic, won him popular respect as a man of the people rather than a haughty magnate. During the plague of 1405-06, he ordered bread and alms distributed to widows and orphans. His generosity eased unrest and gave him the image of a benefactor. At home, he was stern but just. He taught his sons Cosimo and Lorenzo accounting, Latin, and Roman law, urging them to listen before you speak and never flaunt your wealth. Cosimo absorbed these lessons deeply. In 1412, Giovanni was elected Gonfaloniere of Justice, the Republic's highest office. The term lasted only 2 months, but its prestige was immense. For the first time, a man of non-noble birth held the city's top civic post. True to his nature, Giovanni ruled quietly, yet left a legacy. He initiated the tax reform known as the catasto, adopted in 1416. It was Florence's first property-based tax. Every citizen declared assets, income, dependence. The burden was distributed fairly. Rich paid more, poor less. The reform won him public trust and cemented his standing as a guardian of equity. He died in 1420, peacefully and without pomp. He left not palaces or titles but a system, a solid bank, civic respect, papal alliance, a just tax code, and 2 capable sons. In his will, he ordered continued charity and church restoration rather than decoration of tombs. When Giovanni de' Bicci died in 1420, he left his son not merely a thriving bank but a philosophy, a way to wield quiet power. Cosimo de' Medici would refine it into the invisible architecture of rule. Though he and his descendants never wore crowns, their influence over Florence and Italy was so profound that history calls them princes in all but name. Cosimo was born in 1391 in a modest house on Via Larga. His childhood unfolded amid discipline, detail, and constant business talk. His father introduced him early to bookkeeping, Latin, rhetoric, and the company of humanists and craftsmen. Visitors to their home included bankers, priests, notaries, and diplomats. Cosimo learned to read motives, to listen between the lines, to understand a city where authority flowed from trust and debt rather than swords. At about 30 years old after his father's death, he took over the family enterprise. He maintained the same discreet policy: no ostentation, no open factionalism. Under his cautious management, the Medici Bank expanded across Europe. By the mid-1420s, it had branches in Venice, Naples, Geneva, and Bruges, and remained the papacy's favored financial partner. Inside Florence, however, rival families like the Albizzi and Strozzi resented his growing influence. Unlike them, Cosimo sought no office. He built a network, not a party, supporting guilds, rebuilding monasteries, funding artists. He revived work on the cathedral dome, trusting the bold plan of Brunelleschi and financing the project that began in 1436. This was more than patronage. It was politics. The dome became a civic symbol of faith joined with reason. Behind that symbol stood Cosimo, a citizen who ruled without decree. He also began collecting books, not as decoration, but as the seed of one of Europe's first public libraries. His agents searched Venice, Bologna, and later Constantinople for Greek and Latin manuscripts. From his circle arose the Platonic Academy, led by Marsilio Ficino, where scholars sought harmony between Christianity and classical wisdom. But invisible power breeds envy. By the mid-1430s, the Albizzi accused him of tyranny and corruption. In 1433, Cosimo was arrested and imprisoned in the tower of the Palazzo Vecchio. From there, he negotiated calmly. Through churchmen, bankers, and guilds, he secured commutation of his death sentence to exile. He left for Venice, where he was received with honor. Yet even in exile, his influence endured. His bank flourished, and his allies in Florence pressed for his recall. A year later, in 1434, he returned triumphantly. His enemies were banished. From then on, Florence remained a republic in name, but a Medici realm in substance. Cosimo changed no laws, claimed no titles, built no fortress. He governed through debt, favor, and silent presence. People sensed. He demanded nothing, yet refusing him was perilous. He continued to nourish the arts. Donatello sculpted for him the bronze David, the first nude statue since antiquity. Masaccio painted the Brancacci Chapel, pioneering light and perspective. Ghiberti completed the Gates of Paradise for the baptistery. Cosimo funded the monastery of San Marco and gave the Dominicans his book collection. He said, "He who adorns the city strengthens its soul." In his final years, he withdrew from public life. Aware of his near absolute influence, he feared turning the Medici into a hated dynasty. He avoided pomp, traveled without guards, dressed in plain black. His humility only deepened respect. The people called him Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland, not as a title, but as gratitude. He died in 1464 at about 73 years of age. He was buried in San Lorenzo beside his father. Thousands attended, not by obligation but by affection, for the man who had ruled Florence without a crown. When in the year 1469 Cosimo de' Medici, called the Father of the Fatherland, died in Florence, power passed to his son Piero, nicknamed the Goati, for the chronic illness that limited his movement. Piero ruled only briefly, about 5 years, but in that time he managed to preserve his father's financial and political legacy. After his death in 1474, the head of the house became his elder son, 20-year-old Lorenzo. He was not formally elected to high office and bore no title, yet from youth he was considered exceptional. His education was overseen by the humanist Marsilio Ficino, the translator of Plato, and one of the founders of the Platonic Academy in Florence. From an early age, Lorenzo not only read the ancients, but absorbed the idea that a person can perfect himself through reason, speech, contemplation, and action. He wrote poetry, took part in contests, organized festivals, gathered philosophers and artists. People said he could converse with a monk and a diplomat, a merchant and a poet, a boy from the street and the ambassador of Naples, and each felt he was truly heard. As head of the family, Lorenzo declined formal government, yet began shaping his own model of rule. He acted through personal ties, dinners in the Medici palace, support for the guilds, and a gentle, almost invisible influence on the election of Signoria members. He did not threaten or intimidate, but his advice became decisions. He was called Il Magnifico, the Magnificent, and in that name, there was not only admiration, but recognition. Lorenzo had united dignity, generosity, learning, and firmness. He continued the tradition of patronage begun by his grandfather, but if Cosimo favored architects and Piero church projects, Lorenzo became a new kind of patron. He invited artists into his home, discussed subjects with them, opened his gardens and workshops to them. Under him, the young Michelangelo Buonarroti, already notable for carving marble with astonishing precision, was received into the Medici household. The boy was then a teenager, and Lorenzo personally provided him a separate room, books, access to ancient statues, and the care of the best masters. From this was born not only a great sculptor, but the very notion of the artist as a genius rather than a mere craftsman. At the same time, the philosophical dimension of his policy deepened. Lorenzo gathered outstanding thinkers at the Villa Careggi. There lectured Pico della Mirandola, the young scholar who, at 23 years of age, composed the oration on the dignity of man, a text that, for the first time in history, proclaimed human freedom and the capacity to choose one's own path as the highest form of the divine plan. In those conversations among gardens and ancient busts, humanism took the form that would later spread through Europe's universities. Yet Florence's internal stability remained fragile. The Pazzi family, wealthy and influential, had long felt pushed from power. With the support of Francesco Salviati, the Archbishop of Pisa, and with the tacit consent of Pope Sixtus IV, members of the Pazzi clan plotted a conspiracy. Their goal was the physical elimination of Lorenzo and his younger brother Giuliano, which would open the way for the old aristocracy to reclaim the Signoria. On Sunday, the 26th of April, 1478, during festive Mass in the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, Giuliano was stabbed to death with multiple dagger blows at the very altar. Lorenzo managed to escape. Wounded in the neck, he hid in the sacristy and was then led from the church by supporters. The conspiracy failed, and within hours, the city erupted in fury. The conspirators were seized and executed. Archbishop Salviati was hanged from a window of the Palazzo Vecchio. Several participants were torn apart by the crowd. Angered by the death of his protege, the Pope placed the city under interdict and, with the support of King Ferrante of Naples, launched military action. In this crisis, Lorenzo took a step that secured his reputation not only as a diplomat, but as a statesman. Without guards, he went personally to Naples to negotiate with the king face to face. He could have been arrested or killed, but Ferrante, impressed by his courage, agreed to peace. The settlement saved Florence from war. After this, Lorenzo began to consolidate power systematically. He created a new tax commission, controlled the distribution of offices, yet did not violate the outward form of republican institutions. He acted not as a tyrant, but as an architect of order. Under him, Florence flourished, becoming a center of printing, philosophy, art, and international alliances. Even so, his health weakened with the years. By the early 90s of the 15th century, he suffered more frequent attacks of gout, and his liver failed. He withdrew increasingly into seclusion, while trusted agents took his place in public affairs. Shortly before his death, in March 1490, he summoned to his side the friar Girolamo Savonarola, whose sermons were already causing alarm. Tradition says the monk refused him absolution without public repentance and renunciation of power. What Lorenzo answered no one knows. He died a few days later, at 41 years of age, in his Florentine palace. The city mourned him as a father. He was buried in San Lorenzo beside his grandfather. He was called the Magnificent, not for wealth, but because he united an era, binding together antiquity and Christianity, artists and bankers, philosophers and diplomats, merchants and poets. He left not only a memory, but a cultural space in which the images of the Renaissance still live. After the death of Lorenzo the Magnificent, when the Medici were driven from Florence and the city entered the age of Savonarola, bonfires of vanities, French invasions, and reforming zeal, many believed the family's story had ended. Yet the Medici preserved what mattered most: their financial system, international connections, and access to the church hierarchy. It was the church that became the road by which they not only returned to power, but for the first time in the family's history, rose to the summit of spiritual authority. The dynasty's revival began not with a palace or a bank, but with a tiara, the papal crown. The first Medici pope was Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici, the second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent and brother of the murdered Giuliano. Already at 13 years of age, Giovanni received the title of cardinal by the will of Pope Innocent VIII. Despite his youth, he studied canon law, political history, and Roman diplomacy. He spent decades at the papal court, awaiting his hour and honing the art of subtle influence. In March 1513, after the death of Pope Julius II, the cardinals elected Giovanni de' Medici to the throne. He took the name Leo X. He was 37 years old and, as the Chronicle says, on the day of his election he uttered the phrase that became famous, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." Leo X entered history as the Pope of the Renaissance. He patronized Raphael, continued commissions to Michelangelo, blessed the humanists, and turned Rome into the capital of art. His court shone with wealth, learning, and splendor. Under his aegis, the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, begun under Julius II, advanced. Yet despite the brilliance, his pontificate was marked by financial instability. Vatican expenses grew, the treasury emptied, and one means of replenishing it was the vigorous sale of indulgences, remissions granted for payment. In October 1517, in the German city of Wittenberg, the Augustinian monk Martin Luther published his 95 Theses condemning the sale of indulgences. He argued that salvation could not be bought and called for reform of the Church. At first, Leo X treated the challenge with irony, but 3 years later, when Luther refused to recant, he was formally excommunicated. This act set the Reformation in motion, one of the deepest crises in the history of Western Christianity. Leo X's papacy ended in December 1520 with his sudden death. He left the Vatican in debt and amid spiritual conflict. The next pope was the Dutchman Adrian VI. After his short reign, the only non-Italian pontiff in a century, the cardinals again turned to the Medici. In November 1523, Giulio di Giuliano de' Medici, nephew of Leo X and the illegitimate son of Giuliano de' Medici, was elected to the throne. He took the name Clement VII. Educated, intelligent, and diplomatically skilled, he lacked the political resolve required in an era when the Church's authority was under siege from all sides. It was under him that the catastrophe occurred which forever altered the face of the papacy: the sack of Rome. In the spring of 1527, the army of Emperor Charles V, an allied host of Spaniards, Germans, and Italian mercenaries, marched on Rome. The cause lay in Clement's tenuous balancing between France and the Holy Roman Empire, entering into firm alliance with neither. The emperor's displeasure grew, and when his army went unpaid, it decided to take Rome by force. At dawn on the 6th of May, the assault began. Clement VII took refuge in Castel Sant'Angelo. For days, the city suffered brutal looting, murder, rape, and the destruction of monasteries and libraries. Contemporary estimates spoke of more than 8,000 dead. Even Byzantium, in its time, had not fallen so ignominiously. The Pope became, in effect, a prisoner of the empire. His authority was shattered. After his release and partial restoration of power, Clement remained gravely weakened. He failed to halt the spread of Protestantism, enacted no reforms, and did not restore the Church's prestige. Yet in his final years he took a political step that ensured the dynasty's secular future. He secured from the emperor recognition of his nephew Alessandro de' Medici as Duke of Florence. This occurred in 1533. For the first time, the Medici received not informal but legal monarchical power over their native city. It symbolized the end of the Republican era and the beginning of a new, ducal one. A year later, in September 1534, Clement VII died. He left behind a church riven by schism, a city ravaged, and a family poised to reclaim temporal rule. Though the pontificates of Leo X and Clement VII were the Medici's spiritual pinnacle, at this very moment their political transformation began, from bankers and popes to hereditary rulers. After Pope Clement VII's death in 1534, power in Florence faltered again. The new duke, Alessandro de' Medici, confirmed by the emperor and backed by a Spanish garrison, ruled strictly and sought centralization. But his tyrannical tendencies, contempt for old families and personal vices made him deeply unpopular. In January 1537, he was murdered by his own cousin Lorenzo, the grandson of Lorenzo the Elder, from a cadet branch of the family. This killing might have reopened the path to a republic, but events took a different turn. Emperor Charles V, seeking Italian stability, insisted on appointing a new duke, not a seasoned aristocrat, but the young Cosimo de' Medici, then only 17 years old. He descended from the line of Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Many in Florence assumed he would be convenient, an inexperienced youth to be guided from the council chamber. Cosimo proved otherwise. From the outset, he showed independence. He rejected attempts to control his entourage, personally negotiated with the Spanish garrison, tightened military discipline, and began restoring civic administration. Within his first year, he made clear he would not be a figurehead. Soon a conspiracy erupted. In 1542, a faction of the nobility tried to organize an uprising to restore the Republic. It was crushed swiftly and harshly. The guilty were executed or exiled, and Cosimo used the moment to bring the political elite firmly to heel. From then on, his authority was uncontested. He also understood that to rule, one must not only suppress, but build. He launched a broad administrative reform, created a new hierarchy of officials, strengthened tax control, reorganized the courts. His main support became professional bureaucrats rather than nobles, a shift from feudal principle to a modernized state. Territorial expansion moved in the same direction. After prolonged negotiations and military efforts that culminated in the mid-50s of the 16th century, Cosimo subjugated Siena, one of Tuscany's largest cities, formerly under Spanish protection. After the final conquest in 1555, he incorporated Siena into the duchy, thereby doubling his domain. In recognition of his achievements, Emperor Ferdinand I of Habsburg granted him the title of Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1560. It was the highest rank ever bestowed on a Medici, and made him the first ruler in all Italy to receive so elevated a status within the Holy Roman Empire. Cosimo was not a poet like his forebears, did not write treatises, and did not conduct philosophical debates. He cared for order, security, and discipline. Yet he keenly understood the power of symbols and knew that architecture, art, and urban design could serve the same end as an army. He therefore commissioned Giorgio Vasari to remake the government buildings, created a new administrative center, the Uffizi, and linked the ducal residences by a covered passage, the Vasari Corridor, completed in 1565. He also chose the Palazzo Pitti as the new residence of the ducal family and began its vast expansion. This palace, once owned by the merchant Pitti family, became a symbol of the passage of power from merchants to dynasty. In the bubbly gardens, terraced vistas and basins were laid out, presenting an image of order governing even nature. He devoted special attention to the University of Pisa, restoring its privileges, increasing funding, and attracting professors from Bologna and Rome. He founded a military engineering school for the study of fortification architecture and artillery. Under him, ports were built, fortresses strengthened, roads modernized. He dreamed of turning Tuscany into a modern European state. Despite his stern exterior, Cosimo was no stranger to culture. He commissioned new frescoes in the Basilica of San Lorenzo, restored the Medici sepulchre, safeguarded the Laurentian library, and supported the creation of the first state archive. His name became associated not with celebration, but with system. He established the foundations for power in Tuscany to become hereditary and durable rather than accidental. He died in April 1570, at 55 years of age, after a long illness. Before his death, he abdicated and transferred authority to his son Francesco, marking the first peaceful, orderly dynastic succession in Medici history. When people speak of the Medici, they recall bankers, dukes, popes, and reformers, but with no less force they recall those whom the Medici supported. No other family left so tangible a trace in marble, frescoes, architecture, and letters. And among all those they helped, sustained, and inspired, none stood closer to them in stature than Michelangelo Buonarroti, a man for whom art was not a craft, but a way of thinking. He was born in March 1475 in Caprese, into a family belonging to impoverished nobility. At a very early age, he was placed in the workshop of the painter Ghirlandaio, where his talent was noticed, and then sent to the Medici Garden, a place where ancient sculptures collected by Lorenzo the Magnificent were kept. There, the young Michelangelo first found himself in a space where power and art fused into one, where a statue was not merely an object but the embodiment of philosophy. He lived in the Medici household, ate at their table, listened to conversations about Plato, Aristotle, and Dante, and observed their manner of governing and debating, absorbing the idea of the human being as the center of the universe. This experience stayed with him forever. Later he would say he had learned to see not the form, but that which is hidden within it. Decades passed. Michelangelo became renowned as the sculptor of David, as the painter of the Sistine Chapel, and as the architect of the Dome of St. Peter's. And then, in the early 20s of the 16th century, when the papal throne was held by Leo X, the son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, he was asked to create a sepulchre for the junior branch of the Medici family in the new sacristy of the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence. The project continued under the next pope, Clement VII, also a Medici. He commissioned Michelangelo to design not merely tombs, but an entire space, a chapel where architecture, sculpture, and light were to join in a single meditation on time, glory, departure, and memory. The principal figures of the tomb became two dukes, Giuliano de' Medici, Duke of Nemours, brother of Leo X, and Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, his nephew. Neither possessed outstanding political significance. Giuliano died at about 37 years of age. Lorenzo was even younger. But Michelangelo did not aim at historical exactitude. He presented both as allegories, as images of two sides of the human principle. Giuliano is portrayed as an active, vigorous warrior, staff in hand, in a pose full of energy. Lorenzo is pensive, with his elbow resting on his knee and a finger pressed to his face. His features are veiled in shadow. He does not speak, he reflects. And beneath each of them lie the symbols of time. Beneath Giuliano, night and day. Beneath Lorenzo, dusk and dawn. Night is a female figure with a taut body and a face turned in slumber, yet not at peace. In her features there is fatigue, unease, a troubled quiet. Day is a male figure left unfinished, as if emerging from the stone, muscular, powerful, and yet incomplete. Dusk is a bent warrior with slackening arms. Dawn is a body awakening, its spine drawn in tension. Michelangelo did not seek the symmetry the patrons expected. He created drama, not diorama. He did not immortalize the Medici as dukes. He immersed them in a philosophical model of time, in the conflict between being and disappearance. He did not make portraits of Leo X or Clement VII. He did not depict those who paid. He made a sepulchre without names, only bodies, marble, light, and silence. Work progressed slowly. Michelangelo was dissatisfied with the marble deliveries, quarreled with overseers, wrote angry letters to the Pope, and at times left Florence. During the uprising against the Medici, he hid in cellars, fearing for his life. Yet he always returned. He was not merely building, he was fighting for the chance to tell the truth. By the mid-30s of the 16th century, the sepulchre was virtually complete, but Michelangelo did not consider it finished. He left for Rome, where he undertook the construction of St. Peter's Dome, directed architectural projects, corresponded, and composed poems. In his letters, he called the chapel an unfinished work that speaks for itself. The Medici Chapel in San Lorenzo is not merely a burial place. It is a philosophical manifesto. There are no inscriptions, no emblems, no eulogies, only silence and the eternal dialogue of forms. Here the dukes are not rulers but participants in the movement of time. Day yields to night, light fades and is born again, and all of it in marble that cannot be effaced. Later, Giorgio Vasari wrote that no chapel speaks so much without words. That is its force. The Medici desired immortality, and Michelangelo granted them not an image, but an eternal presence. Not a portrait, but a state. He transformed their death into a form that does not die. When a dynasty disappears, especially one that for centuries held not only the throne, but the brushes of painters, the hands of sculptors, and the minds of philosophers, its end does not always sound like a fall. It can be almost voiceless, without upheavals, without shots, without manifestos. Thus the Medici departed, not overthrown, but dissolved into their own shadow, into a chain of weak marriages, childless heirs, exhausted ideas, and history's accumulated weariness. After the tragic deaths of Francesco I de' Medici and his wife Bianca Capello, which occurred in October 1587, power passed to his brother, Cardinal Ferdinando. He laid aside his orders, returned to Florence, and became duke. For all his strictness and religious discipline, Ferdinando I was a man of action. He developed trade, strengthened the Tuscan fleet, reformed taxation, and promoted science. Under him, the port of Livorno became Tuscany's commercial gateway, where Jewish and Armenian merchants received unprecedented freedoms. He patronized scholars, supported agriculture, and reformed laws. But with his death at the beginning of the 17th century, specifically in 1610, a new stage began in which the Medici brilliance slowly dimmed. His son, Cosimo II, though he supported Galileo Galilei, was weak in body and hesitant in spirit. He died young, at 30 years of age, leaving a minor heir, Ferdinando II. Governance passed to two women, the widow, Maria Maddalena of Austria, and the grandmother Christina of Lorraine. Their regency was marked by a tightening of Catholic morals, dogmatic rule, and the repression of free thought. The Inquisition gained strength, and scientific inquiry once again began to leave Florence. In adulthood, Ferdinando II tried to recover what had been lost and supported the Accademia del Cimento, one of Europe's first scientific academies, founded by Galileo and his pupils. Yet his efforts were not accompanied by economic reform. Tuscany grew poorer, its cities lost population, and the duchy's political weight declined rapidly in the face of Europe's rising powers. He was followed by Cosimo III, the longest-ruling Medici. He ascended the throne in 1671 and held it until his death in 1703. For more than 30 years, his reign brought conservative reforms, heightened ecclesiastical control, and the suppression of cultural life. He banned carnivals, restricted the movement of Jews, closed theaters, and introduced laws against immoral behavior. His piety was not luminous but somber, tending toward fanaticism. Cosimo III's personal life was unhappy. His wife, Marguerite Louise d'Orléans, niece of Louis XIV, left Tuscany, preferring convent seclusion to courtly life in Florence. Their son, Giangastone, became the last of the dynasty. He showed little interest in politics and suffered from loneliness, depression, and illness. His rule, which began in 1703, marked the end of the Medici age. Grand Duke Giangastone spent most of his time in the Pitti Palace, surrounded by dubious favorites, fools, lackeys, and chance guests. His power was purely nominal. Tuscany was effectively governed by advisors from Austria and Spain. Yet even in his weakness, Giangastone took several steps that set him apart from his predecessors. He repealed his father's repressive edicts, reopened theaters, and eased religious censorship. He lacked strength and health, but perhaps he alone among the late Medici understood that the light of the era was fading. When Giangastone died in July 1730, he was 52 years old. He left no heirs. With him ended the 400-year history of a dynasty that began on Via Larga with a bank counter and finished in the shaded quiet of a palace, becoming a shadow of its former greatness. Tuscany was briefly governed by Charles III of the House of Bourbon, but soon power passed to Francis Stephen of Lorraine, husband of Empress Maria Theresa. Formally, he became Grand Duke, inaugurating a new dynasty, the Habsburg-Lorraine line, which ruled Tuscany until the unification of Italy in the 19th century. The Medici never returned, neither through bastards nor through heirs in the female line. Their departure was silent. In Florence there was no uprising. The bells of mourning did not toll. The city went on living, but without patrons, without the architects of power, without a family that knew how to join gold with the brush, reason with dream. The palaces remained, but the lights in the windows went out. The books remained, but their pages gathered dust. The collections remained, but the collectors were gone. Yet the death of a dynasty is not the death of its ideas. In the next chapter we will tell how everything the Medici built, gathered, funded, signed, commissioned, and inspired did not vanish with their bodies, but on the contrary, became part of Europe's cultural fabric, without which history is impossible. When a person dies, words, deeds, and memories remain. When a dynasty disappears, there remain cities, buildings, collections, laws, habits, ideas, and even the very notions of power, beauty, and human purpose. The House of Medici ceased to exist, but all they created over more than 4 centuries not only outlived its creators, it became an integral part of European history, culture, and political consciousness. The Florence we know today is unthinkable without the Medici legacy. This is not a metaphor, but a historical fact. Those who walk onto the Piazza della Signoria pass buildings erected or restored by the will and with the funds of this family. The dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, completed under the direction of Filippo Brunelleschi, was made possible by the support of Cosimo the Elder. The monastery of San Marco, where Savonarola would later preach, was refitted thanks to that same Cosimo. The Uffizi Gallery, now one of the world's foremost art museums, was originally created by Giorgio Vasari as an administrative complex at the behest of Cosimo I, but soon became the repository of the family's art collection. That art collection is one of the most important parts of the Medici legacy. Across generations, members of the house purchased, commissioned, and carefully preserved paintings, sculptures, ancient artifacts, precious stones, scientific instruments, rare manuscripts, and books. These objects did not merely fill their palaces, they formed a new attitude toward culture as a means of understanding the world. When, in the year 1743, the last representative of the dynasty, Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici, died, she left the city a will by which all family collections, libraries, and works of art were forever transferred to Florence on the condition that they never be taken out of the city. That bequest became the foundation for some of Europe's first public museums and saved priceless works from dispersal. The Medici influence is felt in science as well. Galileo Galilei, whose name is forever linked with the birth of modern science, was under the patronage of Cosimo II de' Medici. In his honor, Galileo named the moons of Jupiter he discovered the Sem-Medician stars. Later, at the Medici court, the Accademia del Cimento was founded, one of the first scientific societies where observation, measurement, and discussion were practiced, laying the groundwork for the development of early modern European science. No less significant is the Medici political heritage. They devised a unique model of governance. Outwardly, the city retained a republican form, but in reality, all major decisions were made by a narrow circle loyal to the family. It was neither open despotism nor democracy. This structure, built on reputation, control of finance, and cultural hegemony, proved remarkably durable and later inspired many ruling dynasties of Europe. Their contribution to the religious sphere is also ambiguous yet important. Two Medici popes, Leo X and Clement VII, played key roles in the age of the Reformation. Leo X, a patron of art and a subtle politician, allowed the conflict with Martin Luther to grow. His successor, Clement VII, faced its catastrophic consequences, including the sack of Rome in 1527. Although the deeds of these popes brought the family fame, they also revealed the limits of their political power amid the storms that engulfed Europe. Despite religious and political upheavals, the Medici maintained the status of cultural leaders. Their approach to power, where culture was not ornament but instrument, shaped a new kind of elite, educated, strategically minded, seeking not merely control but influence. Their name became a symbol, not only of power, but of largesse. Machiavelli, reflecting on the nature of the ruler, inevitably turned to figures like Cosimo and Lorenzo. Later, in the 19th century, French historians and writers such as Stendhal and Alexandre Dumas fashioned the image of the Medici as enigmatic, cunning, yet brilliant patrons of art and political intrigue. Since then, this myth has taken root in the popular imagination and become part of Europe's cultural code. One must not forget the Medici Bank, among the most influential financial institutions of its time. Founded in the early 15th century by Giovanni di Bicci, it eventually spread to branches in Bruges, London, Rome, and Naples. The bank became a model for future European institutions, and its systems of double-entry bookkeeping and bills of exchange proved so effective that they were adopted across many countries. The Medici understood that money is not only gold, but trust, structure, and the capacity to foresee. In this sense, they anticipated core principles of the modern financial world. Above all, the dynasty left an idea that the human mind can transform reality not by violence but by creation. The Medici showed that political power can be built upon art, that architecture can express authority, and that science can affirm order. They were not always impeccable. Their power was not bloodless. Their decisions often provoked disputes and conflicts. Yet, in the end, they embodied the spirit of the Renaissance, faith in the human being, in reason, in beauty, and in the possibility of harmony between power and culture. And when today we gaze at the city's profile, at palaces and domes, at canvases and galleries, at marble tombs in the Medici Chapel, we see not mere traces of the past. We see the living legacy of those who believe that power can be eternal when it is incarnated in creation.